Mark Rogers TV on the ACC Championship game, which means a whole bunch for both teams, with number one Clemson undefeated taking on North Carolina, winners of 12 consecutive games, up to 10th in the latest college football playoff rankings. We bring in Ryan Cantor of Shaking the Southland and also Jeff Greenberg from Sports Glutton to help us break it down from each side. Guys, we always appreciate the time. Ryan, since you're number one, we'll stay with you here, and let's get going on this Clemson football team that everybody points to the Notre Dame game and how good you looked, especially for about 3+ quarters, and then the Florida State effort. Close ball game. Florida State played extremely tough in Death Valley. Deshaun Watson puts together 2 drives, pulls away for the victory. But in recent weeks, maybe Clemson not playing its best football. Any concerns there?
Yeah, well, in the past four games include a win over Florida State, which for North Carolina would be their best win. But if you look more closely at the 3 that followed that, Syracuse was on the road. It was a tough battle. Clemson did not play well. Wake Forest is terrible, and Clemson took care of business, looked pretty good doing it, had a lot of backups in. The score just isn't really indicative. Clemson played well in that game. And then at South Carolina, they had 3 fumbles. They lost all 3, which is a little unlucky there that you lose 3 out of 3. But the game was really close, really not as close as the score indicated. It was a 37-32 game, but there was a touchdown with 1 second to go, so it wasn't quite that close. But if Clemson fumbles 3 times and loses all 3 fumbles, they'll almost certainly lose in Charlotte. So they definitely need to play a bit better than they have. They didn't on rivalry week.
Hey, Jeff, in looking at this North Carolina team, early season lost to South Carolina. And there's a difference in looking at the score versus looking at the game and watching the game. I think everybody that watched the game could see that North Carolina played better. 3 big turnovers from Marquise Williams, red zones interceptions, late defensive breakdown for a 75-yard touchdown run. So they rebound from that. Now 12 consecutive wins, and really nobody's paid any attention to North Carolina until about 2 weeks ago. Then it started to dawn on some people, hey, look at this team. They're on the move, and look what could happen. So just your thoughts about the recent surge from the heels.
Yeah, I mean, after the first game that really they shot themselves in the foot, 2 interceptions from the 10-yard line in, another one in the red zone. They reeled off 11 straight wins, which has never happened in school history. They're 11-1, which basically matches their best record. Swept the Coastal Division. Just closed out with, a couple interesting games when you think about the stretch they had to go through. They went on the road to Pitt on a Thursday night when Pitt was ranked. They beat them. They took on Duke when they had the controversial call against Miami, so everybody expected Duke to come out blazing, and they absolutely trucked Duke hardcore. The next week, then you go to Virginia Tech's game with Beamer's last game, senior day. Everybody in that stadium wanted Beamer to go out a winner. They still pulled it out. And then, they've also got the rivalry game. And then squeezed in there was a Miami who actually, if you look at what Miami did since they let go of Golden, they were 4-1. And that one was against North Carolina. Clemson beat them in the last game, with Golden. But Miami looked really good except against North Carolina when it was about 31 something at halftime. Starters were out by the fourth quarter. Same deal with Duke. And so I think right now UNC is playing really well, but I think Ryan hit on something that is going to determine the game, and that's the team that doesn't turn the ball over. Both teams are extremely hard to beat if they don't turn the ball over. And I think if you look at the Virginia Tech game, 24-10, they're driving to put the game out, turn the ball over, bring Virginia Tech right back in the game. I think if you look at even this last weekend against North Carolina State, it was 35-7 after the first quarter. 3 turnovers, let them to come back into it. They never really came back into it close, but still allowed them to score some points, make the score closer than the game was. So I'd have to agree with Ryan that the talent on UNC's offense is there, just like Clemson's got an offense. Both defenses are playing well. I think it's going to come down to the turnover battle.
Hey, guys, unlike the other 3 major conference championship games, this pits 2 exceptional quarterbacks, 2 marquee players at the position. People know a little bit more about Deshaun Watson because the stage has been bigger for him a number of times, most notably this season against Florida State and Notre Dame. People are going to see Jeff Marquise Williams for the first time. A number of people are, because of the games not having near the magnitude. So what can you tell us about Marquise Williams?
Well, I can tell you you have a fifth-year senior, played about the worst game of his career in that first game against South Carolina, and has been humming along pretty good ever since. He's second in the ACC to Watson in QB rating. He racks up yards in many different ways. He's got over 2,600 yards passing, but he also has about 800 yards rushing. So he's that dual threat that really, this year, especially since he's been injury-free, when he runs the ball, as Coach Fedora told him, I want you to run it to score, and he really does. I mean, he's not, a scramble at last resort. He scrambles on purpose. His passing has gotten a lot better this year. He's been able to go further in his progressions than he has in previous years. He's throwing it around to everybody and anybody, not just one or two people. So he's really spreading the ball around and making sure his playmakers make some plays for him. But, again, when he protects the ball, he's a dynamic quarterback that teams have to prepare for because he can hand the ball off or fake you on the read option, and 10 yards later you're finally catching up with him. So I think what people are going to see actually is a pretty similar quarterback to Watson in terms of style. In the All-ACC vote, Watson was number 1. That's where I voted him. And Marquise was number 2. That's where I voted him. So you're seeing the best two quarterbacks in the ACC, and you're going to see fun quarterbacks at that position making big plays on both sides of the ball, and I think that's what people will see Saturday night from a national perspective.
Okay, Ryan, what impressed me about Deshaun Watson is not just the freakish athleticism, but coming out of the gate as a freshman, even last year, he played with poise and was under control, made the right decisions pretty much from the get-go. So this is a special player. Just recap the not just him, but the entire offense, picking up for Mike Williams, that early season loss, your number 1 receiver, and just the explosiveness of this Clemson offense.
Yeah, coming into the year, we expected the offense to be explosive, and we expected the defense to have to rebuild. It was surprising early in the year, really throughout much of the first half. The defense was phenomenal, and the offense kind of struggled a little bit. Watson was throwing interceptions. And now as the years progressed, the offense has really found its groove. It took a couple weeks, especially with the loss of Mike Williams, who we had hoped would be back by now, but he's still not. Sharon Peake stepped up. Deion Kane has stepped up. So the receiving core finally came back together. And now the offense is extremely explosive. One stat that I think is a key differentiator between Watson and Marquise Williams, Watson's completion percentage is upwards of 70%. Marquise Williams is still very good, but it's a shade below 65%. And he has a lot fewer passing yards. And I think the way the offense is just unbelievably explosive now. On the flip side of that, the defense is looking really tired and they don't have quite as much depth. But I think Clemson has easily a top 5 offense in the country.
Yeah, the Clemson defense has given up some yardage in spots. The North Carolina State game was a bit troubling. You mentioned recent efforts against South Carolina and Syracuse in particular. I'll go to the last 7 to 8 minutes against Florida State when you needed defensive stops and you needed Deshaun Watson, and you got both. He made 2 outstanding drives. He extended third downs with his legs, converted those into first downs. He extended plays, made the right decisions downfield throwing the ball, and the defensive pass rush just took over the game. Sean McGuire didn't have a chance. The defensive line just stuffed Alvin Cook and stopped him on a 4th and 1 or 2 play. The defensive line is still exceptional, and, of course, you got Mackenzie Alexander on the back end.
Yeah, the defense has come through in the big moments, and I think if they could fight their way through this game, having that almost month or so of rest will do them a lot of good. Ben Boulware, weak side linebacker, struggling with some sort of a shoulder injury. I think Shaq Lawson may be banged up. I know Mac Alexander missed the Wake Forest game with an injury, so they're just banged up and tired. I think they've got enough to get through this game, but I think the long layoff before bowl will serve them extremely well, and they'll look a lot like the best team in the country after that.
Jeff, we talked about a lot of people seeing Marquise Williams for the first time, and he's a senior quarterback, but there's a number of playmakers on this offense, so the same people that haven't seen him have not seen the likes of Elijah Hood and some other people, so this is a spotlight game for a number of players, Ryan Switzer and others, who could really come up special in this one.
Yeah, I think that people have seen the last 4 or 5 weeks when the offense has really been clicking. When you look at the games they've had, they're not just winning by a touchdown. They went to overtime and won by a touchdown Virginia Tech, but they played a good Duke team, but they killed them. They played a good Miami team, but they killed them, and they pretty much made mincemeat of NC State this last weekend. And the defense was a big factor, but the offense, it was different people doing it in different ways. Against Duke, it was the long ball. I've never seen a quarterback throw the long ball that many times in one game that precisely. Against Miami, it was more of a mix. And then, you go to NC State, and next thing you know, you run for 374 yards, which was the most yards in one game in Fedora's tenure at UNC. So you've kind of got to pick your poison right now with the offense. You mentioned Ryan Switzer, who's one of the, if not the most dynamic player in the ACC in terms of his ability to not only play receiver but also be dangerous in the punt return game. You've got Matt Collins, who everybody knows you're going long to Matt Collins, yet people still get beat long to Matt Collins. And you've got two big guys that are prototypical giant receivers in Bug Howard and Quinshaw Davis, who just, you throw it their way, they're going to catch it. Then you mentioned the backfield Elijah Hood, who was first team all ACC. So Dalvin Cook and him were the two first team all ACC running backs. He just came off of 220 yards against NC State. And oh, by the way, his backup, TJ Logan just went ahead and rushed 6 times for 100 yards against NC State. So the key to all of that, I think, is what the offensive line is doing. But you've got an offense that it's really hard because you can't guard them all. And Clemson's got a great defense, great defensive backs. But someone's got to guard somebody one up, and they're not going to be able to double team anybody. And so that's going to be an interesting battle to watch.
Yeah, people love to hear about offense. They love to see offense, but the difference for North Carolina this year is the defense. The offense is more efficient, but had that explosive ability last year. It's defense that brings this team to the ACC championship game, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, it's no doubt that people talk about all the defensive statistics you want. The most important one is your scoring defense. And last year they gave up close to 40 points a game. This year they're giving up 20 points a game. I'm not a mathematician, but if you give up 20 points less a game, you probably have a better chance to win than you did the year before, and that's what they're doing. They're not dominating anybody in terms of, they give up the yards, but they don't give up the points. I think a perfect example was against NC State, something they've done all year long. UNC fumbled or turned the ball over twice inside their own 20-yard line, held them to field goals. So I think with the defense, they also big difference from last year. If you watch any of their games, including the Clemson game last year, they always let somebody just fly free open down the field. It seemed like there was opposing wide receivers everywhere every game last year. It's not happening this year. They actually are I think they're first or second in the country in terms of giving up explosive plays, meaning they don't give them up like they did last year. So it's be key because Clemson's got a lot of playmakers. And they've got a lot of talent on offense. They've got a lot of people for Watson to involve. But if they can keep the big play from happening, they're going to stay in the game like they have the last couple weeks or actually the whole season. And that's going to be important if UNC has a chance.
We're on with Jeff Greenberg from Sports Glutton and Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland. Before we start sizing up scenarios, Ryan, anything else that we've missed on the Clemson side?
Yeah, I've got a good question for Jeff here. I think a lot of Clemson fans are not extremely comfortable with our kick return defense. Not so much punts, but on punts we see Ryan Switzer, maybe the best in the country. I think he's got 8 career punt returns. Just an awesome return player, as well as a very good receiver. Will he be back there returning kicks, and what type of playmaker is he in that scenario?
Switzer does not go back on kick return. He's just punt return. Kick return, you have TJ Logan typically, or Chris Francis and Mike Hughes. For whatever reason, he's actually never done kick return other than in kind of kick return safe situations where they're expecting an onside kick and you put the one guy far back. His damage is mostly on punt return. So, UNC's done well on special teams all year. They've gotten some good kick returns, but the playmaker that Switzer is, being all ACC in that category as well, is from the punt return game. And then again, he's made a bigger mark this year as a receiver because he's hard to guard in space, and he can take a 5-yard pass and go 60 yards in a heartbeat. I mean, last year in Death Valley, he took about a 5-yard tunnel screen and about 70 yards against an outstanding Clemson defense. Now, you can say outstanding Clemson defense every year because that's what it seems like it is, because it is. I think that injuries or not, their defense will come ready to play. But to answer your question, punt return is mainly going to be the opportunity. But if the kickers don't kick to them, it's hard to return a punt these days without the ball. So it'll be interesting to see a big special teams play is out there. Which team makes it might be a big deal, but again, I think it's going to come down to turnovers and to see who really grabs hold and controls the game.
Is Logan a dangerous kick return man?
He can be. I mean, about 2 years ago in the bowl game in Charlotte at this stadium, he took a kickoff back for a touchdown. Mike Hughes, who's a dynamic true freshman, has come close a couple times, and then Chris Francis is always this or forgotten guy that is a speedy running back that's powerful, that has good vision, and can always break one off as well. So that'll be interesting to watch. But if you're looking for a breakaway kickoff return, it would be Logan.
Okay, Ryan, you got the number 1 team in the country. If they lose a close game, if they get housed, they're done. They lose a close game, considering what people think in that college football playoff committee about Stanford and Ohio State. Do you think Clemson maintains a top 4 position?
Probably not. I'm not so sure they would deserve it. I mean, my thought would be that UNC would have to jump them. So that would knock them out. Now, maybe if Bama loses, then it's just total chaos. But at that point, what's the difference between Clemson and Ohio State? I suppose Clemson's resume is a little bit more impressive, but I think if Clemson loses, UNC deserves to be in. If Bama loses also, but then it's total chaos. But frankly, that's not a scenario I want to think too much about.
Jeff, so North Carolina finishes this season off with 12 consecutive wins here and defeats the number 1 team in the country, despite what people have said about the schedule. Do you think they deserve the spot? Number 2, do you think they'll get the spot?
I think the winner of this game most definitely should be in the Final Four for a few reasons. One, if Clemson wins, they're in. They're the number 1 team in the country. They're undefeated. That shouldn't, they should be in. If they lose, I do agree with Ryan. The loser of this game, well, especially North Carolina, but if Clemson loses this game, they will not be in the Final Four. But the winner of this game should be in the Final Four. And where I'm looking at this is now that you've got Notre Dame out of the picture, Stanford's got 2 losses. If they win the Pac-12, great, but they still are a 2-loss Pac-12 champion, not a 1-loss Power 5 champion. If UNC were to win and you're looking at Ohio State and Stanford, those are really the 2 you're looking at. If it's Ohio State and UNC wins the conference and Ohio State doesn't, I'm looking at the same scenario I saw last year when Ohio State was the conference champion and the Baylor and the TCUs weren't. A 1-loss champion should always make it over a 1-loss non-champion, considering also that Ohio State's loss was recent at home to a team that's in the championship game. So, I mean, the Big Ten, if Iowa wins, they're in. Doesn't matter. Michigan State's got 2 losses. They're out of it. But that makes it even worse for Ohio State because now the team they lost to just lost again. If Michigan State wins and they're in it, and now you're looking at UNC and Ohio State, well, are you really going to put Ohio State in with Michigan State, 2 teams from the Big Ten, when Michigan State just beat Ohio State? I don't think so. I think when the eye test happens, and people are forgetting, if UNC were to win this game, they're beating the number 1 team in the country that's been number 1 for 5 or 6 weeks now. That's going to affect, one, their strength of schedule, best win conversation, all that. But it's going to affect the quote-unquote eye test. So I can't see a scenario where the winner of this game, well, I mean, I know there's scenarios, but I just feel like the winner of this game is going to be in because you're either going to have an undefeated number 1 Clemson or you're going to have a 1-loss ACC champion matched up against a 2-loss Pac-12 champion and a 1-loss Ohio State that didn't win their conference. So that's my opinion. I just feel like and you're seeing some momentum along that this week. You see some more people coming to that conclusion that it's going to be hard for the committee to do that unequivocally. If you're not the conference champion, you need to be better than these conference champions. And I just don't know if Ohio State has that argument. And quite frankly, again, it just reminds me of why Ohio State made it last year.
I completely agree. So I make the distinction between who the best teams are versus the teams that earned it. Most people think Ohio State's one of the best 4 teams in the country, but they would not have earned the spot. North Carolina has earned the spot regardless of what we think of their resume, and obviously it gets a huge boost beating the number 1 team in the country. I'm right on board with you. I think there would be hell to pay if 2 Big Ten teams make it and we leave out 2 conference champions. That would not be deserving. That would not be sending the right message. That would not be adhering to the format, especially when that conference champion only has one loss. So North Carolina would have earned it, in my view, with the win over Clemson as well.
Mark, before you start wrapping up, I want to get Jeff a little riled up. I just posted an article entitled "Clemson Must Ruin Everything for the Tar Heels," and it referenced the 2007-2008 basketball season when Clemson was very, very good for Clemson, but they lost at home in overtime to the Tar Heels. They went on the road, lost in double overtime with some ridiculous calls. Then they lost the ACC championship game, which dropped them down to a 5 seed where they lost to a very underrated Villanova. It ruined what would have been an unbelievable basketball season. And I'm hoping now it's our chance for payback. They've had a magical season, the best since I think it was like 97. It was whatever the last year for Mac Brown was there. And if we beat them, especially if we can beat them convincingly, man, well, a lot of people say they're just a product of a weak schedule. They were never that good anyway. I would expect Florida State to jump them in the bowl order. They're already ranked above them by the committee. Go to the Peach Bowl. That could send UNC all the way down to the Russell Athletic Bowl, where they'd have to play a really good Big 12 team. Heck, they could lose to Oklahoma State in Orlando, and then you look at their seasons, like, man, they lost a terrible game to start. They won 11 straight, and then they closed out with 2 losses. What is there in this season? Thank goodness it's basketball season. That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, and looking at that, and I know that the basketball pains you. I know that being 0-60 or however 0 for never winning in Chapel Hill, it pains Clemson fans. I know it. I'll be there this year to see the tradition continue. But you also got to remember it's rare, and I'll honestly admit it's rare for UNC fans to be talking about football in December. So 11-1 is amazing for UNC. Everything else from this point on is gravy. I mean, you can even look at the team. Their 2 goals of the year were win the Coastal, win the state championship, meaning beating State, beating Duke, beating Wake. They had to reset their goals because they reached their goals. Their goal was to do what they've already done. Everything else from this point on is playing with house money. If you're 11-1, if they somehow pull out the win and they're 12-1, go to a bowl game, obviously that's unbelievable. But if they're sitting there and the worst case scenario is they don't beat the number 1 team in the country, they go to the Russell Athletic Bowl, play a great team, and they're sitting at 11-3. Is it going to be disappointing? Yeah, it's going to be disappointing, but it's also going to be pretty cool thinking about the fact that they just won 11 games for the first time in forever. They won 11 games in a row for the first time in school history. And right now, they're playing in the ACC championship game for the first time against the number 1 team in the country. The spread's about 5 or 6. And the funny thing is people are picking UNC in certain things because again, they're the underdogs. They have nothing to lose. Clemson has everything to lose. Because on the flip side of that argument is Clemson finally going to get over that hump? Are they going to win the game they're supposed to win and make it to that Final Four? Clemson could finish, 12-0? They could finish 13-1, and if that one is this Saturday, the whole season's lost for them, and it will be devastating, and no one will care that they ran it all the way up to this point. So I would say that the pressure is on Clemson in this game because they have everything to lose. UNC at this point is playing with house money. Some of that house money is being put on UNC. I think it's going to be a tough game. I think they're going to have a few breaks go their way. But I think their offense is more than capable of keeping up with Clemson's offense. Now it's just going to be who protects the ball.
Yep, I agree with you. If we lose this game, the season's, I won't say ruined, but the primary goal is to win the ACC, and if we don't win it, then that pizza party we're going to on Sunday will be terrible.
All right, that's good stuff out of Jeff Greenberg and Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland. Jeff joins us from Sports Glutton, and it's the ACC championship game, and it's Clemson and Florida State dominating this conference for the last several years. That has been the de facto ACC championship, but I believe we may have a situation where the Coastal gets strong representation this year out of North Carolina, not a team that's an afterthought like a Georgia Tech at 6-7 or even Duke, or a situation where, again, Georgia Tech made it again last year and represented the division rather well, but here a legitimate championship game with a North Carolina team that could do even more. So, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Great discussion.
Thanks.